Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with Chris
Hello.
and Nate.
Got my dad robes. I'm ready for this.
And we are here tonight to talk about George Gordon Lord Byron's poem, Lines Inscribed Upon a Cup Formed from a Skull. So, um, I'm going to throw out one little fact which I found out as I was working on memorizing this poem, um, which maybe will color the discussion somewhat. Um, George Gordon actually had some of these, had cups used for drinking, which were made from human skulls. Having and you drank out the where you would pour your beverage and drink from was the actual bone.
So,
So,
so did you
oh,
see the actual background for how he got that?
um, some something about that. There used to be a monastery at one of his estates. Is that correct?
Yes, it was a monastery,
And the monks
and
were buried.
then it was like converted into a private residence.
Oh
And
yeah, that was probably about the time of Henry VIII when he
right,
basically confiscated all the church land.
and Lord Byron, he was pretty much always drunk and on drugs, and also often in need of money. So he got it in his head that the monks had buried all of this treasure somewhere on the property. So he would go around digging it up, and he never found treasure. Why there would be treasure, I really don't know. But he never found treasure. He just found all of their bones. So most of their bones he just tossed into a box, apparently to scare his servants and impress women. And the skulls he just sort of decorated his room with, and the biggest one he sent to a silversmith to be turned into a cup.
Yes, I read he had like flower pots made out of some of these. Um, yeah, George Lord Byron, I think it is safe to say, was beautifully crazy. Would be a good way to describe him.
I'm not
And
going to say beautiful. I will go with fascinatingly. I'm not so sure about beautiful.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not talking to him personally, but like I can't recommend his kind of lifestyle. I can't say people should imitate this. I will say I think people should try to lead a Christian life and should try to adhere to Christian virtues. However, if you're not going to do that, you may as well be like Byron. Like if you're not going to try to be the Christian you ought to be, you may as well put the pedal to the metal and be as crazy as him. Because why do anything in the middle?
Fair. That is fair.
So, Nate, would you like to get to? You have any opening thoughts after that?
The guy spent too much time in his cups because they started talking to him. I mean, it's like, yeah, he's sitting around, having his York moment, looking at this skull like, alas, poor, well, we're going to call you Jim. I have no idea who you are, but hey, you're helping me out. I can see Ron White doing this, actually, having like a scotch glass made from something like, yeah. So I bought this house, found out there's a lot of dead fellas in it. Turns out that wasn't such a bad thing. And they're like, all right, get after it.
It's it's kind of interesting. One thing about this, it's considering the subject matter, considering he's talking about like drinking from a dead man's skull. Um, it's actually kind of a cheery poem. It's weirdly lighthearted about the whole thing. It's like, yeah, I'm dead, whatever. Can't do anything about that now, and you can't make it better. So hey,
Again, at least I'm still at the party. Ha
Right. It's like death is inevitable, but at least you're doing something productive afterwards.
yeah, it's I'm dead, but I'm still contributing to society. Which I mean, there are living people who don't contribute that much to society, so
You're gonna die and start voting Democrat and actually hurt society. So, sorry,
oh,
let's go back.
yeah, I would go on way too long on that tangent right now, so I'm going to walk away from that. I'm going to leave that one alone. Um, Chris, what were any thoughts from you?
Well, just overall, it is sort of a fun poem, despite the subject matter, like you said, and it's relatively straightforward. Like, it's not trying to be particularly deep. It has a message, but it's also sort of just playing around with it, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't think Byron ever particularly reaches for, usually tends to reach for philosophical depth. I think amusement might be more his style. I think ironic detachment is he was basically a hipster, but much cooler than hipsters are today. Um,
I was a hipster before it wasn't cool.
um, yeah, what was and one other thing, like I said, it's considering the subject matter, it's surprisingly cheerful and lighthearted. But
I mean, that's what you would expect to be, though, if you were like, still a willful being, having some attachment to Earth after you're dead, because the worst has happened. There's nothing to worry about now, and that's what the skull keeps talking about is, says, there ain't no problem, says, yeah, so what, by all means, get your gob on there. Says, the taste of your lips is nowhere near as foul as that of the worms. They've already been all over this.
well,
That's
and
so it's actually positive, because if you are aware after death, then it's actually pretty terrible to be stuck in the ground, aware but sort of separate from everything. So it's actually very optimistic.
well, and the other thing, it's although it's cheerful about and rather lighthearted about the subject of death, it's at the exact same time it's pretty cynical about living people. He says, in me behold the only skull from which, unlike a living head, whatever flows is never dull. And it's like, actual living people are kind of boring and annoying, and so our head, and since what is it? Our heads such sad effects produce, and it's like, when you're up and moving around and talking, and you kind of tend to make other people unhappy. You kind of tend to cause trouble. So maybe you're more useful as a skull that people just drink from. It's like,
Well, I mean, he's not wrong. To give him his due, he's got a pretty sharp view of the human condition. We generally are troublesome beings, and to know a person is to be brought issue from them. In this case, the issue is some yummy wine. in the case of the skull, but in the case of the other party goers, God only knows. There's probably going to be some buzzkill in there somewhere who is going to be dragging things down. It's up to the skull to counterbalance it. And the skull is apparently doing a good job. I mean, if it was a particularly brainy monk, he's got a pretty good volume in there you can exploit.
Well, yeah, I remember. I forget who it was. It was some other literary figure. It was some American literary figure, Daniel Hawthorne, who had met with Byron on his estate and had seen this, and he said, like, you can fit an enormous quantity of wine in this thing. Like it's much larger than you're probably actually going to drink, unless perhaps you're Byron, in which case that might be just all in an ordinary evening. But what was the other thing? Oh, yeah. I also find it kind of interesting. The next to last stanza, he said the skull, the dead man speaking, says, and maybe someday, couple 100 years from now, this could happen to you too. Someone could dig up your bones and attach a pedestal and use you as a drinking glass. So, don't worry about it too much. You won't even care at that point.
Now you see, that's just sloppy. If you really cared about that, you would have that put in your will.
Well, I don't think any of the monks on on Byron's estate volunteered for the job. So, but
I mean, I got to admit, it's kind of an interesting idea, but this whole I'll put in my will. I want you to make a drinking glass from my skull, and I bequeath this skull drinking glass to whom precisely? Because, I mean, that's a heck of a statement to make. Are you complimenting the person? Are you condemning the person? It's like, you are a flat out crazy mofo. I think you could use this.
Well,
I can't think of a person I would send it. Well, Kanye. I would send it to Kanye.
Well, and
I would be on an album cover.
I actually kind of wonder about the legality of doing this today. Even if like there are laws about how you can and what things you can and cannot do with the dead body. I don't know if you put this in your will whether it would actually happen. It would be interesting to speak to an estate lawyer about the subject and find out.
I think it really depends on how it would be phrased exactly, because I have heard of at least one aspiring actor donating his remains to a particular theater so that he could be the Skull Yorick.
And it wouldn't be a tough audition. He probably doesn't have a lot of other competitors, and he'd have his lines down pretty quickly. It wouldn't take much work to get that
a handsomer man with stronger cheekbones.
That's real method acting. Really committed to the role.
They have the teeth for it though, because apparently Yorick had some pretty goofy teeth.
I don't remember. Is that part of Hamlet's little monologue there?
That's how the gravemaker says, "How do you not recognize this guy?" He's like, "Whose skull was that?" And he's like, "Don't you recognize?" And he taps on the teeth. He's like, "Recognize these choppers?" He's like, "It's Yorick." And Hamlet's like, and on we go.
Have completely off topic. Have you guys ever seen? Okay, first of all, Mystery Science Theater 3000, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen they took this black and white German film of Hamlet that had been dubbed over in English,
Oh god,
and they did a Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode from that.
that sounds amazing.
It's pretty good. Oh, I can't remember any good lines from it. Right? Oh, well, yeah, there was the part where just before the duel, the Claudius had poisoned the wine, and the queen decides, oh, I'm going to have some of this, and he's like, but he's not in time to stop her, and when the queen rushes over and grabs the goblet, they ever say, "Ooh, booze, give me."
God.
Yeah, it's what else?
Oh,
You can look it up. It's worth watching sometime. Um,
oh.
it might even be on YouTube. I couldn't swear to that. I might look it up and see if I can send you the link. But anyway, um, Chris, okay. I'm mostly out of direct comments on the poem. Chris, do you have anything more?
Well, I have heard of different ways where people have tried to make it so that their remains would be useful after their death, like instead of just being buried. And that is something kind of interesting to think about. Because, I mean, you're not really using your body anymore. So I've heard of people having themselves buried, like in a cardboard box with like plant seeds or tree seeds and different things like that.
It'd be a hell of a tree to germinate from 6 feet.
Yeah. Well,
I
probably a little bit shallower grave for that purpose.
What was another I was just thinking of other interesting uses for people's bodies or bones, and I realized you could take the femur, and if you cut it in half, and you had a good smith to do this, you could take the femur bone and you could turn that into the hilt of a sword.
Yeah. And then even something as, relatively mundane, but still really amazing when you think about it, stuff like organ donation. It's like, really, when you think about it, there's a lot of stuff you can do like after you die that still brings a lot of joy to the world.
Yep. For all you kids out there, there's really no good reason not to be an organ donor. I mean, they're not going to come and get them before you're dead. So you get to use them for as long as you need them. And then once you're dead, cool, somebody else can do that now.
Well, I would say they're not going to come and get them before you're done with them just yet. Obamacare never went away, and we haven't seen where that's going yet. So
At present, my point stands.
socialized medicine is not pretty. It does not treat people well. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, come on. It's not your property.
So Nate, did you have anything else on this one right now?
No, never have been very good at getting the mindset of a crazy hedonist. So I'm like, yeah, okay. About the only headspace I can figure out is, dumping a whole handle of whiskey in there and being like, yeah, party time. I I don't see what would possess someone to live this lifestyle and write this kind of poetry, which I guess is one of the reasons we read literature, is to think about things we wouldn't otherwise encounter in our own minds.
Well, I do think it's. Oh, I forgot. I meant to. And for those of you who know who this is, you'll and are familiar with him, you'll understand the reference. I would like to dedicate this discussion to the Supreme Dark Lord Vox Day, recording this poem and doing this discussion in his honor. We salute you, sir. I am not one of the vile faceless minions, but I do appreciate your work. But having said that, I think this is definitely a fitting poem for the month of Halloween. For I posted this just 2 days before Halloween, and I think it definitely fits the season. And it's
Yeah.
not especially deep, but I think it's fun, and I think it's an interesting thing to read up on, have a little chat about. And anything else either of you two right now?
I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. Sorry, go again.
I think I want like a chip and dip platter made of a pelvis now that I think about it. It's the right shape.
You'd have to have something to make the bottom stable or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, hey, you try and pour wine into the top of a skull, it's going to drain out through the sinuses. But
There's actually TV tropes. There's a trope on like glasses made from a skull, and one of them referred to a web comic, and the guy had did this some like horrible barbarian lord tried to do this, but every time he went to drink from it, everything drained out from the eyes. He's like, "Find me an enemy who has no eyes."
just plug the hole, bruh. But anyway, yeah, I'm thinking I'm thinking I'm gonna get me like a pelvis as a chip dish. Not that big on the wine anyway, you see.
Or you could be or become a chip dish. Have that made out of your pelvis.
People who know me well say I don't have enough hips for that.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered this one pretty well. So again, thanks for joining me tonight, and we will be signing off. God be with you.
Have a good one.
Good night.